So good afternoon and welcome to KVEC's Autism Hour with Kim Howard from the Kentucky Autism Training Center. Today's topic is going to be unraveling the mysteries of data collection. And Ms. Kim is going to lead us through some ideas and strategies and ways to collect data and what to do with that information. So thank you all for being here. And Ms. Kim, you have a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I want to share a couple of resources. This is the book that I use to get started with, and it's by Christina Reeves. It's called Taming the Data Monster. It's been out. There's an older version, and then I believe a newer version came out in 2021. It is full of data collection resources, not just behavior ones, which is what I primarily focused on, but they focused on data collection across special education. So this bit.ly, the bit.ly/data-monster-DL, if you type that in, Christina Reeves and Suzanne Cabot, and I think I'm saying those both right, created a huge data resource folder that is full of many, many different tools that you could use to collect data. So just know that. I wanted to make sure, and that is supposed to, you don't have to own the book to have access to their data collection sheets. They put it out there for everyone because really we're all in this together. And data collection can be a beast. I know when I was in the classroom, collecting data was a huge stress for me, and I'm sure it probably is for you as well. And so then thinking about how do you collect data? Hopefully you do collect data. Kentucky IEPs require us in that present levels of performance to put where our kids at right now. You know, what goals are they working on? How are they meeting those? How do they fall compared to their peers? So I'm sure that you are collecting data, and probably you are collecting data through multiple streams, meaning multiple different ways. I'm not sure how you do it, but I will tell you how I did it in my classroom. And this is going to speak to my age a little bit. I do have friends that are very electronic based, and they take data on on an iPad, and they keep their data sheets through an electronic. But I was old school, old school meaning I needed a paper copy, and I needed each of my students had their own data binder. Um, and I will say that really, as long as you're meeting the standards, and what you're doing is legal, ethical, and moral, right? And you are taking the data that you're supposed to, then there's no right or wrong answer in the way that you do it, unless your district has its own policies and procedures, which is something that we'll talk about, because anything that they require will trump everything that I say. So know what your rules are for your district. They are important to know. And it's a good place to start. But thinking about how do you do your data collection now? So think about that for a second. What are you doing right now? And does it work for you? Is it a good system? I will say that I personally feel like data collection is a little bit of, for me, when I was in the classroom, and even now, the data that I collect now, it takes some tweaking and fine tuning to find a system that's comfortable for you. And the system that you use has to be, the system that you use has to be easy access. It has to be something that you already have set up, that you can take data simply, and whatever format that looks like. It might be like paper copies and you're writing your data out. It might be electronic based. Maybe you are within a program that takes data, that collects data for you. So you're using some sort of, so I know some of the different like STAR programs, some of their online stuff will take data for you. And I know there are other online curriculum based learning programs for students with disabilities out there that take data as we go. And this is my check with your district's policies and procedures, right? Every district has policies and procedures, and probably they address data collection in there. And data collection is also driven by your IEP. If my IEP says my student's goal, I'm collecting data every week, or hopefully it doesn't say every day, but I've had behavior goals that did. Um, if I'm taking data every day, every week, if I'm taking it twice a month, how often do I need to be taking that? And it's going to vary from goal to goal and student to student. So knowing those things are critical going into setting up your own system for data. And my goal today is to kind of talk you through some things and to give you lots of resources and options, because I can tell you what worked for me, and I can give you options and resources and places to start, but you will have to try some things out and see what works best for you. And I tried in my classroom, I did, I probably did a different data collection system every 6 months for the first year or two, finding the one that worked for me. And it ended up being the one that worked best for me was every student had their own data folder that had specifically their IEP goals in it. And if I was collecting other data on them, like behavior-based data, social skills, any of those other pieces, all of their folder contained every data collection sheet essentially that I would need to take that data. And for some of my students, I might include in there like manipulatives. So if we were doing a math or a shape or number, one of those types of things, I I put I put specific manipulatives in there, which I did change those out so kids don't just learn those manipulatives. But some of those kinds of things, thinking that through, and being willing to try out some things to find what works best for you, can be it's a huge challenge. So what are our challenges with data? Time constraints. My gosh, we have a million things that we need to be doing. And just writing the IEP itself can be a major time consumer. Um, Knowing what data to collect. And part of that is going to be who is collecting that data. How am I going to use this data? What format? Is this an electronic format? Is this paper copies? How am I going to translate those paper copies into information that I can use for an IEP? Where do I store this at? Because essentially, data collection can have students' private information on it, and can be something that you need to consider. How am I storing this? I have a friend that does a really nice job of her data collection folders are color coded, and none of them have students' whole names in them. They might have initials. They might have, they usually just typically have initials, but then they're color coded. And so the yellow folder belongs to Susie. The green folder goes with Ronnie. However that works, each student has their own specific color, and the adults in that classroom know that. But if an outside adult walked in and saw their data collection binders, they wouldn't know. It protects privacy a little bit. So thinking through like where to store it can be critical information. And we know that we have some significant time constraints on our hands. So coming up with a system that works for us is definitely a challenge. So hopefully today what you will leave with are some resources to help you get started. I will say for me, some data was easier to collect. How many sight words a child knows. Things like, do you know this color or don't you? Numbers, some of those academic goals are more straightforward than when we get into data collection for behavior goals. Social skills goals can be murky sometimes. Some of those goals for me were some were more straightforward and some were less straightforward. So some of the resources that I have to share are specifically around that behavior type goals. But also some of the resources that I'm sharing today have lots of different options that can be used for a variety of needs for taking data. So know those things. How are you going to organize your system? I know people that love Google Sheets and do it inside of an electronic system. I think that is phenomenal if you work in a district that has good internet, right? If you have good solid internet and can access those easily. I went to I've tried that basket of clipboards, and I had some issues sometimes with different I had some issues sometime with different um with my students getting into my I had a basket of my clipboards, and unfortunately I had it down and I had a student grab a hold of it and they threw it, and when they threw it, it bounced and it mixed my sheets all up, and it took me probably a day and a half to straighten it out. But I know people that use those clipboards and they work so well for them. So I know people I went to like a 3-ring binder type system, which was much better for me. I know people that keep a data bin, and like I said, there's not really a right or wrong answer. This is one of those figuring out what works for you, um, and being willing to try out some different things. The other thing with data collection is driven by when you write your IEP. So the hardest thing for me was if I inherited an IEP, meaning that a student came to me and someone else had written their IEP, figuring out those types of things at the start of when I'm writing the IEP, I know that I am writing goals that I can collect data on, and that's going to drive what kind of system that you have. So knowing some of those pieces. So how do we start? How do we start? And that's basically what we just talked about. We start when we're writing the IEP. That IEP goal is completely going to direct what kind of data am I collecting, how often am I collecting this data? How am I going to use it? And what format I am collecting it in? Knowing those pieces, and those can be critical. And I would just say, and I have already said, it can be a gamble, and kind of I had a bumpy start to taking data. Hopefully it goes smooth for you. I did have some really great partnership from teachers that had been in the special ed field for a while that kind of brought me in and said, here's what I do. So it can be helpful to ask your friends and colleagues, what are they doing? Sometimes they have some really good and awesome plans out there. And I'll give you some things to get started with today. All right, I have already said this, so I'm going to skip it. All right, here's the other thing to think about. And here's what I truly found is your data collection system has to be integrated into your instruction process whenever possible. Um, for me, if I didn't integrate that into that, my data collection system wasn't a part of my everyday instruction, meaning I didn't have to take data every day, but I had a system that was out and easily accessible to where I knew that here's one way that, you know what, it's this week, I'm going to take data on Wednesday, or I have a student that I need to take data twice a week. So I'm taking data on Tuesday and Thursday, or Tuesday and Wednesday, however best it works out. I have to have a system that's already set up that I can easily do that in the process of my instruction. It was something and that was my critically missing piece, and why I kept switching data collection systems for a while until I found the one that worked for me. And I did a 3-ring binder that essentially had all of my students' IEP goals out in it, and everybody had their own binder. That was the system that I went to just because I could pull that out. I was working with that student or working with multiple students, and I could hopefully quickly log that data while they were in whatever activity we were doing. So it made a huge difference for me. So train your classroom assistants if you have them. 100%. I think classroom assistants can absolutely help take data. Mine did. We went over the system. We went over the system. We went over what that data should look like, and what was the expectation, and I modeled that for them before I handed it over to them. I would say, all right, here's exactly what it looks like, and here's what I need you to do. So I 100% think, and this is a question that I get sometimes, can my assistant help take data? I personally think yes. I would say this is one of those, it can be in a policy and procedure. So some districts will say yes or no on that. So always make sure of what your district allows. But I totally believe that classroom assistants can help take data. And we need their help because we're monitoring multiple goals. If I have 10 students and they all have 5 goals, that's 50 goals. And maybe more than that realistically. So review that data regularly. Whenever you are The thing with data is it doesn't do any good just to collect it, right? If I'm just taking data, but I'm not using that information, then I am shortchanging both myself and my students. One of the things that I did was I had some older students that they had some specific goals in math and reading. Um, and they helped me log their data and we reviewed it together. So I did old school. We did bar charts. We did a bar chart and I would block out to the bars that they had earned and then the student would color that in and or colored them with markers or however they wanted to do it. But we went over the data for that together. And we looked at, were they meeting the goal? Were they not meeting the goal? What could we do different? Um, and having them help me chart. Actually, they weren't taking the raw data, but we were taking the already collected data and then turning that into a graph. um, it became a math activity of teaching them how to read a graph and how to make a graph. And it was something that they personally really enjoyed. But I have to have a purpose for the data. And so figuring that out, how am I collecting it? How am I using it? When am I going to review it? One of the things that I did in my classroom was we did Fun Friday. And I did Fun Friday in the sense of I didn't put my students on movies. None of my kids would watch a movie, right? No one in my classroom was going to watch a movie. But we did social skills activities. We did board games and shared interactive games during that time. And I used that time. One of the stations that I did was data collection. We were either taking the raw data or when those kids came to me, we were charting their data together. And it worked pretty well, but I had to integrate that and build it into my everyday life in order for that to work really well. Okay, so here was my biggest goal for you today. It was to take away data resources and what are your options? And these are only some. There are a million options out there on what might work for you or what might not. And it really comes down to knowing what is out there and what's available. Um, that's where you have to start at. So that's what we're going to do is talk through some of them. So I'm going to stop share for just a minute and I'm going to open this drive. Hold on one second. I want to show you what's in there and we're going to talk through some of these. Okay, so I think what you should be seeing right now is my Google Drive. Welcome to Kim's Brain and Google Drive. So at the top, you're going to see the PowerPoint folder. So later you can go back and find that bit.ly link and you can find these links easily yourself. One of the some of the options that are in here are duration data. So duration data is how long did it last? I use that for meltdowns. You could use it for a variety of things, but I used it primarily for meltdowns. The thing that I really want to point out and share with you is, hold on one second. I'm trying to make sure. I think it's this one. Let me see. Whoops. Okay. And you should see behavior rubrics is what you should be seeing on your screen. And I'm going to scroll down. So if it bothers you, don't look. This is from the Autism Helper. It is phenomenal because I will tell you one of the hardest pieces of data for me to collect was behavior data sometimes or social skills data. So what she does is she has pre-made, she has in here data sheet. You could use that to collect any type of data essentially. She has things like a graph. I use this graph. This is what my students charted on. I would mark how many blocks they could shade in if I was very concerned that they weren't going to get that accurate. And then they would shade in the blocks. This is the blank one. Hold on. I'm going to pull to one that has the rubrics in it. Oh, here we go. So she has transition rubrics. And this was something that she gave out at the behavior, I believe at the last Behavior Institute. So how do you measure if a student started transitioning? That's a hard one, right? So this is a transition rubric. So a 2 is the student begins the transition within 10 seconds of the transition cue. So this their child's moving from one activity to the next. A 2 means they did it. A 1 is the student begins the transition within 10 seconds of the transition cue with 2 or less prompts. A 0 means they needed 3 or more prompts and it took longer than 10 seconds, right? So you want them to have the higher score there. She puts out a ton of great resources. She has a ton of really good resources out there and a ton of different information. And the nice thing about it is there is a version of this inside of that Google Drive that is editable, meaning you can pull it up in PowerPoint and you can change the you're able to change what it says. So if you need to change the times, maybe your student needs longer than 10 seconds, maybe they need more prompts, you can edit these to make them appropriate for your student and your setting. This is a group work rubric. So what does it look like? Body language, participation, respect to peers. It gives you a way to quantify those that would be translatable to your data collection. I thought these were phenomenal, is what I'm going to say. An independent work rubric. So task initiation, they started within 10 seconds without prompts. Is actively working on the task most of the time. Can switch to a new task with no adult prompts. When the task is done, puts the item away, right? So it basically walks you through everything that you need to know for where are they getting started with independent work. So know those things. They have a using technology rubric. This is the technology rubric. Anyways, all sorts of, a lot of times I'll see it in students' IEPs and it says, I'm going to measure that with a rubric. Well, that sounds good, but you better have that rubric, right? You better make sure that you have that rubric in place. One of the things that I suggest to people is when I am going to the IEP meeting, if I say that I'm going to measure it with a rubric, I probably need to have at least a rough outline of what that rubric is going to look like when I go to that. Or I need it very, very soon after. But anyways, this is a giant resource that has a ton of behavior rubrics in it that I think could be utilized by a lot of people. That would be a good and phenomenal option, right? Lunch behavior rubric. And I'll stop scrolling down, but you guys can look at these recess behavior rubrics. Just some really good options of how might you track some of these more difficult behaviors that you might need help finding. All right, let me show you another thing. So this is preschool life skills curriculum is something that I have actually done. I believe KVEC has this recorded, but what people don't know is, so it's essentially a life skills curriculum, but built inside of it are data collection sheets that might be very useful. And I'm not going to scroll all the way down to them because I don't know about you all, but it will make me a little bit ill, be not fun for you. But it has a ton of the data collection sheets and the RTI for behavior collection sheets already built in. This copy of social skills, if you are trying to monitor and maintain social skills, this has a really nice, always, often, sometimes, almost never. You could just give that a numeric value, 4, 3, 2, 1. And essentially that becomes now a rubric. So things to know, some options that are out there, maybe. I like these ABC charts. This is something that I've shown on here before through some of these different series, but if you are taking ABC type data, these would be very good places. This is just a check sheet right? So I can just check the box instead of having to write it all out. But I did also put the larger write everything out version in here. So know that. Anyways, deep dive into this, take a look. There's a task analysis in there for you to, if you need to, you can break things down step by step. There's some duration. That behavior rubrics has a ton of options inside of it. All right, and I'm going to stop share and I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint. So I'll reshare. Sorry, guys, I'm bouncing us around a little bit today, but these were just some really good options that I wanted to make sure that you knew they were out there. And this is the resource that I shared at the beginning. This bit.ly link has, I think, more than 20 or 30. It has multiple, multiple data resource sheets that are out there that anyone can access for free. You do not have to own the book. But I will say, I personally found the book to be very helpful. I had the older version when I was in the classroom, but there is a newer version that came out in 2021. And really, data collection comes down to having a system that works for you. It comes down to knowing here's the data that I need to collect, and here's how often I need to collect it, right? And then having a system in place that you can access easily. So whether that's paper copies or electronic, and that really depends on multiple things, right? Electronic resources might be harder to access if my school has difficulty with internet. The school that I came from had difficulty with internet. So I was a hard data person, meaning everything, all the data that I collect, or most of it, was on paper copies that then I translated into some sort of graph or some sort of readout that I was passing along to parents or putting into my required data collection. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that's somewhat helpful. Yeah, these are the rubrics that we looked at. She has this is from Sasha Long. She puts great stuff out. You should check her out as well. Lots more than just data collection, but the rubrics, I see that with a lot of IEPs, and they'll say as measured per rubric, which is good. I'm not opposed to rubrics, but I like how simplified hers were. And for me, it gave me a place that, hey, I could make my own rubric. Here's a general layout. I could do something like this and then make it work for what my student needs. So things to think about inside of that folder is a version that you can edit. So you can download that into PowerPoint and you can edit them. Other things to know about are the Kentucky Director of Special Ed. They have information. They have some really good resources on multiple IEP progress monitoring. Data collection is it's giant, right? And you guys know that, I'm sure. Getting started with data collection is a large process and can be hard, but also I always look at it as an experiment of I'm trying out some things to figure out what works best for me and my classroom and what meets the needs of my students, and making sure that I keep myself legal, wanting to make sure that I've done my IEP progress monitoring, and I'm getting the raw data that I need on that weekly or biweekly, or maybe it's a couple of days a week basis that will then push me towards making sure I'm compliant and I have met my IEP progress monitoring needs. And I will tell you, as a new teacher, when I first came into the field, it took me a little while to get proficient at this. And it will take you a while. And you may be someone who's been in the field for a long time, which is awesome. And you may have great systems that work for you. I will encourage you to share them with your new teachers, or even teachers that have been out there for a while, because I have seen some really good systems that people utilized, like a Google Drive type system, and it was creating their own graphs. And it was logging that information, and it was easy access, and it worked really well for them. And I have seen really great systems that are in a 3-ring binder or in a clipboard system. I told you about the lady at the beginning that did the color coded system. Every student has their own color. Every student has a clipboard that has a specific color cover sheet on it: blue, red, green, yellow. And each student's IEP goals are kept within that clipboard. So every IEP goal has either a page, or they're all on different pages, however that works best for them. So it's easy access. So when that teacher has a moment, then she can pull that out. I will tell you, for me, I did better if I had a specific pattern to the week. I always took data on Mondays and Wednesdays, or I always took data on Tuesday, Thursday, whatever way works best for you. My behavior data for some of my students, I collected that daily. It depends on the student, and it depends on what they need. So it's one of those systems that you kind of have to figure out the one that works best for you. And some school districts have their own requirements around data, and their own specific, here's how you have to do it. So know what your district's rules are. That's the other big push that I would say. Make sure that you're compliant and you're following the rules of your school district. Oh, this is an additional resource, right? This is a link, and I know it's really long, and I'm so sorry, guys. You can copy this when you go into the Google Drive. You can download it and then just copy the slide and paste it in instead of having to type all that out. But this is, uh, it will make your graphs for you. It's from Autism Classroom Resources, which I believe is Christina Reeve. It was something that she offered, that was out there and was free. So I just thought that was interesting, and something that would be worth considering for you. So things to know, things to consider.
Thank you, Ms. Kim, for your presentation. I like we did a paraeducator conference last summer, and we talked about some data collection, uh, uh, I guess, documents or tools that you can use. And I love the way that you said, if you train folks on how to use those tools and what you're looking for, then, you more than you can have those folks to help with that data collection, because, they're wonderful. I mean, it's just amazing at the work that those folks do, and everything that they accomplish. Uh, One of the things I think too is when you're using these data collection material or documents, that you have to know if it's a behavior that you're collecting data on. You have to know what that behavior is. Has to be defined in a way that is operational, it's measurable, observable, and objective. So, you can't just put angry as a behavior that you're collecting data on, because, I may look angry all the time and may not be angry at all. So I just think that's something that we need to think about and make sure that you are collecting data on that. And then other sources of data that you could look at could be office discipline referrals, school records, attendance, tardies, things like that. Are all types of data that you can use to help you guide on decisions about, what are some IEP goals, or what are some behavioral goals that we need to address with our students. So
100% agree, Doug. That's great information. Totally the case. And I will say, my classroom assistants helped me take data. They were worth their weight in gold. Um, we did centers, and they had their own data collection sheets at those centers. And I very much agree about the behavior data collection, that they have to know exactly what it looks like. And that has to be written out. I had a student that we were taking data on that was hitting people. And hitting, how do you describe hitting people? How do you, what does that look like? And so our definition was hitting and kicking, hitting or kicking, it was both, with enough force to leave a mark. that was our you had to make she had to hit hard enough to leave a mark, which happened pretty frequently, unfortunately, but that was our goal that we all measured. The other piece with that is if you're taking that behavior data piece is if something happens, I would point it out to my classroom, my assistants, and I would say, "Hey, that's exactly the behavior that I am trying to to document right now. See what she's doing right there? That's exactly what we're documenting." Not that they're modeling it, but essentially they're getting that in-person visual of, "Hey, that's what I need to know if how often that's happening," or whatever it looks like, duration. Um, those kinds of pieces. How many people went to the ER? Hopefully that's not a case, but some of those kinds of things.
I think sometimes with behavior, you have to collect that data daily.
Yeah,
I used a point card in the classrooms and things like that. Not only did it help, shape the behavior, reward positive behaviors, but it was also that data collection piece that I needed to show
yeah,
that the strategy that I implemented 2 weeks ago has made an impact or it hasn't worked. So
yeah,
that those point cards help the kiddos see how well they're doing, but it also lets you be able to find a trend or see if there's any patterns in their behavior. And so I think that's just a way of like you said, again, collecting that data and being
yeah,
informed and making that data collection inform your decisions on how to work with the students.
yeah, 100%. I'd have to agree. Well, I hope that's helpful information. I will say you're welcome to email us. I know data is it's a big it's a big hole to fall down. And it is one of those things that's kind of personalized, figuring out what system works best for you and for your classroom. And that may change from year to year, but
Well, thank you, Ms. Kim, for your presentation this afternoon. Thanks everyone for being here. So until then, be safe, be kind, be exceptional. We'll see you next time.
bye everyone.